And we are live. Good afternoon, Pascal. How are you?
Hi, Alberto. I'm doing fine. It's very hot in Belgium, but I guess in Italy it's even hotter. So, but
Hey, it's getting warmer here as well. I mean,
yeah.
but enjoyable. I mean, I'm not far away from the seaside, so whenever I can, I just take a chance to go for a swim.
Yeah.
So, welcome back. This is our second talk, and
Hmm.
I'm very proud that you're here with me. And because I've got a lot of questions for you. Okay, so I went
Okay.
through your books and I read a lot of things, and I could really face it. Okay, but
Hmm.
there is one thing that we do similar jobs. We talk about China, we talk about our experience, and we help companies to get their business right. Okay, but
Hmm.
there is one thing that it's often um, misinterpreted. Okay, and people complain about it. So let's go straight to the point. Okay, and
Hmm.
let's talk about what it is a double standard. Okay, so uh, double standard. From your book, there is this sentence. It says China accuses the West of double standards, of using one rule for China and another for the West. When it comes to national security, the whole world seems to have double standards on freedom, according to the Chinese. And let me add, um, in my way, my 30 years spent in China, I also adapted myself to accept certain situations. Okay,
Hmm.
and I found out that people accused me sometimes of having double standards.
Yeah.
Having a way of thinking different depending on the situation. So,
Hmm.
what is it your experience? Would you like to share it with us?
Yeah. Sure. So in my book, actually, I took a whole chapter before the book started, which is called a double lens. And what I did is in that book, I actually started to put the Chinese and the Western lens ones next to the other. And as a Westerner myself, I think most Westerners know certain things about China, about opinions that are quite opinionated. And I took the 9, I would say, most opinionated opinions about China. And then what I did next to that on the right page, on the left page was actually the opinion of the West about China, and on the left I said how the Chinese look at that same statement that is made very often by Westerners to actually start to understand a little bit, or to push a little bit more the rhetoric of the Chinese, and to understand really what the Chinese think about these things that the West tells about them and is all in the media. And I did that really to not to polarize, but it's very polarizing. And so the whole idea was actually, before I started my book, to explain the more other layers and what it really is about, I started just putting these things black and white next to each other. And I did
Okay.
that really to show that from a Western point of view, some of the things that China does or did is considered as bad. And very often it's used, that bad statement, to prove that the West is actually doing a good job on that same area. I mean, think about human rights as the biggest topic of all. But there's like many topics like that. And so I think it's interesting to look at how the Chinese look at how the West claims certain things, but actually very often is not abiding to the same standards that they are putting forward towards the rest of the world, and specifically to China. And so this is a polarizing view I used in my book to start off the book, not to polarize, but to show that actually the opinion about China, and more so the opinion about Chinese to the world, is becoming very black and white. And we should start from there before explaining, is it really black and white?
Okay, so the good and the bad with a different background. Okay, and this I understand. So that's very good. Okay, but let's get into some example. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's analyze some of the things that you mentioned in your book with the double lenses. So with the Western lenses and with the Chinese lenses. Okay, for instance, okay, when we talk about copycats, okay, the Chinese steals copy and spies. Okay, but under the Chinese, and this is under the Western lens, and the Chinese lens, instead they say the West has China in a straitjacket, with the IP clause. Okay, would you like to elaborate a little bit more about it?
Sure. So, I mean, I come from technology innovation background myself. And so, I mean, that was one of the main topics that people were telling me every single day. It's like, yeah, but Chinese don't care about intellectual property. They just steal stuff. They try to lie to get stuff, and they spy. Of course, in America, that's a lot of talk about that. And so the whole idea is that China is not abiding towards the IP laws, international IP laws. And there's many aspects to that. First of all, looking at China from a historic point of view, I mean, we could make the same comparison with South Korea, with Japan, also taking a lot of things that shouldn't be taken in the past. Or even America, if you go back more than 100 years ago, they stole from Europe as well. So that's one of the things. But the thing is that because the West from the Industrial Revolution has become so big, ultimately, the West has started to set the IP laws and IP rules, which is great to protect any creation globally. The problem there is that when you're not developed as a country 30, 40 years ago, or a long time ago in China, I mean, this is often used against you to actually protect the multinationals against the ones that want to develop the country, want to develop their company, but aren't able because they can't pay or get some of this IP available. And specifically in the Chinese context, which is kind of a socialist and run by a communist party where some goods should be for the greater good. Think about medicines, for example. I mean, to protect that in order for people not to improve their lives is a bold statement. And so the whole idea, the IP clause, is actually not just about China or the West. It's about those who are enabled, the rich companies, the global multinationals are able to use that against many of the people. And so many of the people I've talked to in China in the past, they felt that it was their only way to start off. And this is also what Huawei did in the beginning. If you take Huawei as an example, I mean, they were clearly taking stuff from Cisco and other companies because that was their way to improve their own products. Otherwise, they would never have been able to make their products, which doesn't mean that once they're actually now in the level of 5G and 6G, that they would just, they actually still need that IP of the rest of the world. And now we're looking at the rest as China maybe to take some things there. The other interesting thing is that IP laws is something global. I mean, there's lawsuits everywhere in the world, not just between China and the rest of the world, even in America. So it's a quite common thing. But yeah, I think that, and there's a lot more to it. But to me, it's really about the clause that we had to protect our own creations. And for countries that are developing, it's been hard in the beginning.
Yeah, I do have my own theory about the IP clause, like you call it. It's more likely that a patent design and a patent product or idea or concept is protected sometimes and not to be developed. Okay, and I realize that there are many patents which are very great, but the big companies just buy them and they don't produce it and they don't launch it in the market so that it will not change the parameters where they're profit right now. But anyway, this is another matter. Okay, and it's very much Western. With my experience is that the Chinese they do copy, but they never copy the same things. That means that when they are asked to produce something, okay, and then someone else comes in and say, I want something similar to that, not exactly the same, but similar to that, but has extra advantages and less cost, they modify it, they just take and change it so that it can customize to the customer desire. And this is how I see them copy. So there was always an implementation in it, and it was mainly driven by the Westerner asking for the products with a different situation. Anyway, This is also very, we're talking about double standard today, so it's very difficult to talk and very difficult to be fair in anyone's opinions because everyone has a different feeling about it. For instance, we got a lot of comments coming in. Let's see this. Okay, Peter Schallenberger says, "What a stretch these days. Let's make the best out of our partnership." I guess
Yeah.
Peter has some experience with both of words, okay, and is a
Yeah,
good suggestion.
and I also think, I mean, one of the things that people don't know about China, or very few people do, is the push towards open standards and open source code, open hardware, open data. And so Chinese are actually doing a lot these days in trying to share, and that's where the cooperation really comes in handy. And so even on GitHub, I mean, a big percentage, I mean, more than 10% of GitHub is all been uploaded by Chinese in China. And so there's a lot of things changing there as well. And as it comes to IP laws, I also think that China now developing, and there's a comment somewhere saying that China has more patents than the rest of the world, or at least is patenting more, definitely in quantity. I mean, it's clear that China's going to start using the IP clause from the West against the West and against Western companies now, and that we might understand over time what it means to actually be on the receiver end.
Absolutely. Oh, by the way, one of the comments says, "Is this really live or is it a recording?" Okay, let me say it's 6:11 p.m. on Wednesday 13, and it's live, my dear friend. Manzana, This is a live session. So if you have any questions, just go ahead, shout it out, and we will reply to you.
Yeah, the one thing that we really want to do here is to answer as many questions as possible. I mean, we can talk for hours about China, but I think it's more interesting if you have any questions that we should tackle them.
Here we got another comment that says it's a combination of Red Scare, fear of communists, and the Yellow Peril, fear of the West being overrun by Asia. That's full in anti-China sentiment in the West today. Yeah, I think we will go over this point. Okay,
so yeah, it's interesting because these 2 points, the ideology and the Yellow Peril, are two of my double standards that I have later on. So it is definitely correct that this is a
well, we can talk about it right now. I mean, we don't have. Okay, so this is one of the slides which we prepare: the yellow perils and the Western imperialists. The two lenses to where we could see it. Okay, so what's the point? Okay, everybody's afraid about China helping a lot of countries, third world countries mainly. Okay, giving them money, infrastructures, and the technical supports, because they think that the feedback will be taking over the place or taking over their resources. Okay, but didn't we do the same things in the past as the West?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how far you go back, but definitely this is one of the double standards that is often set as, even today. I mean, not even in the past, even today. I mean, the conditions. I mean, I just read an article just last week about the loans into Africa, and how actually the West still has many more loans and many more conditions on Africa than China. And I don't want to say one is doing better than the other, but the reality is it's not just only China that is actually providing loans to Africa, and by doing that, providing getting things in return. The things they get in return could be different. That's for sure. But it's this whole idea about the soft power that China is creating from the Western perspective in order to have really more and more power over the world, from linking. I mean, this is what they call the vassal states from the past, from a long, long time ago, and in the imperial China. And I do believe that there's a real misunderstanding on how China wants to create friends rather than to create prisoners, which we have a very different view from in the West, and we look at us as kind of they want to create prisoners, just like many people now say Russia is going to become a vassal state of China, and so this is all in the imperialistic mindset. And the interesting thing about that is that we in the West really see China as a danger in imperialism, specifically when we see what they're doing in the South China Sea, the Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, we're seeing things about what's going to happen maybe with Taiwan, and we see expansion happening a lot. But a lot of it is infrastructure, and a lot of it is planning. But what we forget is that we're actually reflecting our own view of how we used to deal with it in the past onto China, and assuming that they will do that as well. While China in the past, I mean, there's very little examples of this imperialist intentions or even going out of the country, because they've been much more focused on the internal. And I've written a lot about that in my book. But this is the interesting thing, that we're scared of what we have done in the past. And China is actually seeing more and more that the West is actually the biggest risk in the West is actually the implosion, because that's where China's scared of, is to implode and have chaos in the country. And so that's what's happening in the US. And so we're reflecting these double standards is really about how we claim that China's doing certain things to acquire soft power. Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we do have a slides which we prepared, okay, that is talking about the situation where under the Chinese lenses, it goes like the West want to control China. Okay, so the Western order. I mean, China should drive the country the same way as the West does. Okay, and on the other side, you know, there is this Chinese, they don't keep the agreements, okay? And so they think it's unfair the way they do it, okay? Obviously, this is a commercial point of view with the slides, okay? But it has so much more to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, the unfair business, I mean, specifically as a European, I mean, the European Commission has been really focused on telling all the things that China has done unfairly. I mean, there's so many things, whether it's from a trade perspective, that actually have examples. So this is not an illusion. I mean, it's for real that China has not always abided to the rules that we in the West, or especially in Europe, have followed. And that has a lot to do with, of course, protecting certain markets, which now they're opening more and more, but not fast enough according to European standards. It has to do also with antitrust and protecting certain companies or pushing certain industries to become the world leader by government subsidies and so on. So there's a lot of these things. But the thing is that very often when we look at the world order, and in America now they're calling more and more the law-based or the rule-based order is what they say more and more. It's really about the American or Western, but specifically American rules on how to do business. And so China has been going into that direction. And again, in my book, I explain later on that if you look at it from an evolution point of view, actually China did this in just 20 years. It took us almost 100 years to get there. China did this in 25 years. And so they did do that very fast. But in the beginning, yes, many things. And still today, many people haven't gotten used to the bad habits. But the double standards is that when we do business with certain other countries, we control certain countries. And I don't want to name too many, but think about America with Venezuela or Iran, or I mean, there's many countries that are being controlled or influenced very much by American policies. And yeah, so telling that China should not protect its own against others, and then look at what Trump did with China. I mean, it's kind of like a double standard when you start protecting as well. Specifically, if you look now, I mean, my feeling is that the European markets and American markets are getting ever more protective, and China's getting more and more open. So it's kind of all weird to actually say that China is doing unfair business from that perspective.
However, we do have some comments which are
Sure.
saying something different. For instance, there is this guy, Mansana, says the West has so much freedom.
I'm not sure if that's an actual.
You think it's rhetorical?
Yeah. No, I think.
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
Okay, fine with that.
No. What I mean by that is that I think it's to emphasize that that the West doesn't have more freedom than much more freedom than we believe China has, and so that's a different topic on freedom. But I do believe that the lack of freedom that many Westerners think Chinese have is overrated. I mean, there's a big difference between reality and the rhetoric.
All right. Okay. So we have another couple of comments from this guy. Shenzhou says America has double standards for human rights regarding China and Saudi Arabia. And then he continues with another comment and says the United States copied much of United Kingdom's intellectual property during the 19th century. Absolutely.
And actually, my city, Ghent, where I'm from in Belgium, copied everything from the UK for the textile machinery. So we were the best stealers or thieves. And so my city, Ghent, is known as one of the top cities in textile industry, but it was back in the 19th century. It was all stolen from the UK. So yeah, I think But why did we do it back then? Because we were, Belgium was just started. I mean, it started in 1830. We were a country that still needed to develop. Same thing as China. So I'm not so proud about that part of our history, but it shows that everybody steals from everybody when they need to survive. I call that the Robin Hood effect.
The Robin Hood effect. Yeah, absolutely. Stealing from the rich to give it back to the poor. Okay. Then we have this other comment says Chinese invented the four great inventions: paper, printing, compass, and gunpowder, which the West eventually made use of. Absolutely. Then this is a very big contributor. Okay. This is replying to a comment of Mansana China. Mao is a founding father of the People's Republic of China, and he succeeded in the Herculean task of unifying our divided country where Republic of China, Taiwan failed.
Yeah. Long story. It's all in my book as well. And I think, interesting thing is that the name of China before the People's Republic was actually the Republic of China. But then, of course, the whole story, we know that story with Mao Zedong in 1949. But it's true that Mao reunified the country. And Deng Xiaoping actually made the country more open and rich. And Xi Jinping is now making the country proud. That is the three things how I see the three big leaders of China over the past 75 years.
Absolutely. One thing I would like to add is that I don't think I would have ever said this 25 years ago, 30 years ago, because I didn't know. Okay, and we all knew the Western the Western side of a story, Mao and the famine, Mao and the problems, and the constrictions. But the famine was a result of a bad decision in terms of protecting the fields from the birds. So they basically asked every Chinese countryman to kill all the birds that was eating the seeds, so that they could grow. And then instead of the birds eating the seeds, then became the insects that they eat the crops. So it was a very bad decision at that time. Okay, so another comments here. What is China's view on the Nine Dash on South China Sea region? It is a common dispute that making Asian countries distrust of China honoring the sea borders in the area. Okay.
So that's a long story, and it's something that I've explained on the South China Sea further in my book. I think it's in chapter 7. And I think that's a really difficult situation to explain. So I won't be able to do that short here, but I do believe that one of the things that we misunderstand often is why China is doing that, and I think for me, I've put in the book that for me, economic protection is one of the highest requirements for China. And the South China Sea is like 60%, if I recall. I have the exact numbers in my book, but 60% of all the traffic, all the trade going from China overseas is passing the South China Sea. And so they need military protection to actually abide to that economic throughput. And so this is, in my view, while the Americans being in the South China Sea with its allies, Australia and others, is the opposite. It's like a military presence, and that could actually give them economic power. And so there's a different goal and steps towards that goal. And I think as long as we see China as wanting to see this as a protection, it's less frightening. But the problem is for all these countries around the South China Sea, of course, it's a big influence. Because for them, it's not just about protecting trade. It's also about fishing, about gas. It's about military in the future. So, I mean, if it gets very heated, then, of course, the presence of China becomes a big question mark for many of these countries. But then the alternative would be the US, I mean, American Navy. And that could be another question. So yeah, it's a very, very difficult. But I've written a lot about it in my book. I think it's going to be too extensive to explain. But the interesting thing here in my book is also to go back into history, and this is really about who claims that area when. And
a new body.
Long
story. So we have a comment from Marco. Marco says China is closer to a German model than a US model. Oh.
Well, I think China in general, I mean, and this is generalizing, is closer to European models from a socialist point of view, meaning to care about people on the lower end of society. But of course, Chinese as individuals, and this is not the model, this is more their identity, are very much willing to improve life and work really hard towards that. And from that perspective, they do align a little bit more with the American model of being able to create as many businesses and not being hurt by the model itself. So I think it's the two models. But for me, if you look at it from a political model, definitely it's closer to Germany or to Europe in general, but Germany as a manufacturing base, for sure. Yes.
Well, I wouldn't say so. My opinion is that China is closer to China than anything else in the world. I mean, there is nothing that you can really compare, neither the politics nor the soft power and the hard power of a country to any other country in the world. It's so much different in terms of everything, including, but not only about the number of people that are following and believing in what the country is really doing for them, which is the real strength of China. And we often misunderstand it. We don't see that the Chinese are thinking entities. You know, we believe it. They just fall over the copy and they just go after the easy things. Okay, but it's actually not this. Okay, Chinese are very well aware of what is going on, and they know that the country, by the numbers of people that are within, you know, they're doing their best to be on top of any situation. Okay, going back to our slides, I'd like to show this one. Okay, where we talk about that everything from China is junk under the Western lens, and instead you get what you pay for, which is exactly the point, because I've been supplying a lot of goods to many hundreds of, if not thousands of companies worldwide. Okay, and the main questions I always received was, give me a cheaper price. Okay, but a cheaper price means a cheaper product. Okay, and so if we can identify China with cheap products, it's because there are cheap buyers who wants it, and not China who is a cheap manufacturers. What do you think about it?
Yeah, no. I mean, that's exactly what I wrote in my book. So you explained that very well. It's basically you have. I always say China is not bad quality; it's every quality, and you pick what you want. And they can produce the best quality in the world, and that's why companies like Gucci and Apple and many others are assembling and even creating more and more products in China, just because the quality can be stretched to whatever you want it to be. And the interesting thing is which buyer are willing to pay how much money. But the problem is it's so ingrained in our minds that cheap products are coming from China, and they are still. I mean, because it's very hard to compete on price from Chinese products. That we believe that everything from China is cheaper. And my prediction actually is that if we keep thinking like that, in 10 years from now, we in the West could become the cheap factory for the world, simply because China is building that quality that the rest of the world wants, often even at better cost. And so they're just very cost sensitive, and that doesn't mean just bad products. It's just thinking about how to reduce costs constantly throughout the process. And yeah, so I think that's very, very true.
Absolutely. I just to underline what you just say, I'll give you an example. During one of the factory inspections for a shipment of products, okay, I was wondering how come they could give me a very special price on the delivery of the products, and the products, and I had the BOM, I had the bill of material, so I knew exactly what the product would cost, but it was, few tenths of a cents, you're not even a dollar cheaper than what it was supposed to be. So I knew there was something wrong with it, and I check and I check and I check until I found it. It was not in the product, but it was in the papers of the manuals. The paper of the manuals was so thin that you couldn't even touch it. It was gonna break it. So I had to stop the shipment just because the production for the manual was the things that they tried to save some money because they thought they were giving us an advantage. But I didn't want the low quality manuals because the manuals is integral part of the products. So just to give you an idea on where we're gonna work, okay? So going back to our slides, okay, secrecies versus popularity. Under the Western lens, China is not transparent. It looks like we know nothing about China, and China doesn't give us a chance to understand about them. While instead the West, it likes to put everything on display. So this is an important thing to understand. What's your comment about it?
Well, I think the secrecy is just because we look at China, and when I say we, I do mean most people in the West, not everyone, but many people in the West, as being a very closed society, because in general, specifically from a political point of view, it's quite a formal society. And this has to do, of course, if you have 1.4 billion people that you need to govern, I mean, you need to have some kind of rules, regulations, standards. And so this is like, I mean, it's like if you go into a law firm, I mean, you also expect the people to have certain formality. I mean, otherwise you probably say, I'm not going to do business with this law firm. And this is a little bit the case with China. And so once you get through that and you see the people behind that, it's very different. And one of the things that I've always experienced is how open Chinese are in business and even in politics if you talk on an individual level. So that secrecy is something that is really a way of a formality that you see not just in China. It's kind of a way of doing business. But when the Chinese look then at the West, what you often see or what you get as comments is like, yeah, I mean, we may feel that we're more transparent, but that also means that we're much more emotional. And that is also in a good way, but also in a bad way, meaning we just expose everything. And so that creates an emotional environment where politicians get chosen on popularity. And so they're not formal. If you think about Trump, for example, that's the best example, I think. I mean, definitely not formal. They can have 20,000 lies in their presidency and still have a lot of followers. And it's not about being pro or against Trump. It's just about the popularity. And being like very outspoken has become so important in the West that we believe that everybody who's not is actually hiding something. And I think that is the double standards. It's not because people are formal that they're actually hiding things. And that is something that is very hard for Westerners to believe. And so when people say, yeah, are the numbers right in China? They're probably fake and they decide things there and that. And I mean, that is the real problem because of a lack of display of everything and a debate which puts it on the edge. We feel that they're actually not open, and I've experienced the exact opposite in China very often. But we are probably too open and putting it all out there.
We are too exhibitionist.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
Okay. There is another comment from Alboni says, I think we all have double standards. It's human nature, but the double standards in the current geopolitical situation is just off the scale.
Yep.
Yeah,
I can't agree more. I think double standards is for of every country, every culture. I mean, we always see the other party as being not as good as we are. But for me, the double standards right now in the geopolitical connotation is more that we are using the other party to prove that we are doing a good job. Well, I think we should leave the other party more alone in figuring out their own way of doing business. And I think that is the real challenge. We're lacking empathy. We're lacking trying to understand the other party because we're making the other party look so bad and so evil because it makes us look better. And I think that's a real problem with the double standards today. And so for me, the double standards is not so much about whether one party is right or the other party is wrong. I mean, we're all right and we're all wrong. The problem is we start labeling countries and regimes and people based on these standards. And once we do that, if the intention is to show that we are good, then I think that's not the right way to do it. I mean, we should be very careful on that because wars have been started because of these things.
Absolutely. Okay, so here we have another comment. I say, what is the best way for any country getting the short end or double standards to deal with it? And this is a question. So what is the best way for any country getting the short end of double standards to deal with it? And in the case with China, how can they tell their story better? Or is it pointless? Or just keep going? Whoa.
Well, no, just the short end of double standards is not so clear for me. But I do believe that this on the second part, in the case with China, how can they tell their story better? I think that's an easy answer, and that goes back to the previous discussion. I think China somehow should focus more, and this might sound very strange from me, focus more on telling more positive things about the West. And I think if they start doing that, I think that will change also the way. So just taking over the same game as the West does towards China, I think is just aggregating both sides. And then it becomes a boxing match or a ping pong match, and you can't win that as easily. So I think the communication is the biggest issue. And so I'm not a big fan of the very assertive way of the rhetoric that China sometimes uses as a counter reaction to the almost aggressive actions or speeches from America very often. But I do understand the reasoning why it's happening is because it has become a boxing match and you need to fight back. Otherwise, you're going to go knockout. But I do believe by praising and looking for the things that the other party is doing well, I feel that could change a little bit the way that we in the West are looking at China. But that's just my personal opinion.
Thank you, Pascal. There is another comment says from Six Smith Lee says Chairman Mao has an important role in unifying China, but he sucks at governing China. In my opinion, Deng Xiaoping is the father of modern China. Absolutely agree with that. Okay.
I think the two
different ways, but absolutely. I mean,
there's been many books written on both people, but I mean both leaders. But I do believe the times they lived in was so different that it's hard to compare them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's say in Western lenses, we can say that Deng Xiaoping was a luminist. Was the enlightened one, the one that saw the real potential of a country. Okay. Deng Xiaoping was the father of modern China. Okay, while Mao Zedong was the one who said, okay, China has to be going back to the old status of unified and under control. So, but let's go on. Okay, we got a new message from Fosco Bacaglia. Hello, Pascal and Alberto. What's the current salary of an employee right now, say in Dongguan? Oh, well, I can answer that.
That's one for you.
My secretary in Dongguan makes more money than my secretary in Italy. Really.
Net.
And if you want the number, let's say euro. Now euro and US dollar is 1-to-1, and so they can make easily over €1,500 per month.
Yeah.
easily.
Well,
In Dongguan, in particular, where it's difficult to find the right candidates with special skills. Okay, but a worker can get home. And think about it. A worker in a factory, they get their salary, they get their place to sleep, they get their food 3 times a day, and they get their uniforms, okay, to work with. So they basically have no expense. Okay, they can go up to 1,000, even more, 1,200 euro a month, okay, with their salaries. So it's not a bad thing for a specialized worker.
And also more and more companies are moving to the West and outside China, even just because the cheap labor is getting scarcer, specifically with the skilled cheap labor. And I think that's for production, but it's also for engineering. In Shanghai, when I used to have my company there, and this is like 6 years ago, I mean, I was paying as much to foreigners in Shanghai than I was paying to Chinese, and it was sometimes cheaper to get people to come from abroad to code in my company than actually to hire someone local if you wanted really good software programmers.
Absolutely the same for me. When I had my factory in Zhuhai, all the engineering work, I was doing it in Italy. It was much cheaper to do it in Italy with European standards, and so everything was top-notch quality, and very fast delivery, than doing it in China. In China, it was impossible to have the same level of engineering expertise and at such price. Okay, it was really 3-4 times higher to pay for an engineer. So
this is also part of the double standard. So the belief that everything China is cheap.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so there is another question coming on from Marco. It's given the falling birth rate in China as well as other countries, how will China be able to reverse or stabilize this problem?
So,
let me tell you a joke.
Go ahead.
When the COVID-19 was announced in January 2020, okay, end of December and January 2020, so before the pandemic spread out throughout the world, okay, I thought within myself, okay, if I want to solve a problem like getting rid of the elderly and having people to make more babies, the COVID-19 was the right solutions because it was attacking the elderly and letting people sleep together, for consecutive days together because of the quarantine. But that was a sarcastic joke, okay? But that could have been one of a solution. But unfortunately, they decided to have a zero COVID policy, and so nobody has had so many deaths as in the West. So China is one of the, we can say, the safest place by the number in terms of the pandemic situation.
Yeah, I made for Marco. I made a video on this falling birth rate and how China could solve this on YouTube, and so I mean it's a long story. It's actually a 25-minute video, but just shortly, I think productivity is something and innovation that they need to focus on, and I do believe that we are seeing China's falling birth rate as at the same level as Japan, and I think that is very different, those two countries. Because of the internal market it has, but there's still like hundreds of millions of people in China that still don't have a lot of money and still willing to work hard. And so I think there's still quite a few decades, at least 1 or 2, before it's becoming a real hurdle, a real problem, despite the fact that many more people are getting old. And of course, Chinese workers need to work for that. But I think innovation, technology, robots, all these things is the only way to solve it. And then I think from a social point of view, societal point of view, I believe that as the middle class is growing and as they are basically trying to have also a better life for their family, I think at one point the rat race will slow down, which means that they could have 2 children and still afford it. But that could take like another 10 years. But I'm less bearish on that problem on the short term. But I think China it's a really big issue. So China is really aware that on the long term, they need to fix this.
Yeah. Okay, let's go with another message. It's from Jane. Hello, Jane. Okay, yes, there are differences, but the so-called secrecy is also projected by the corporate media. You can find discussion or proposal in Chinese media, but this was never mentioned in the Western media. Correct. I mean, there are a lot of interference in terms of what is discussed about China things. Okay, in the local media, it's very well discussed, many topics, while in the West, we only receive the bad information about it. So yes, I do agree with Jane for this. Okay, thank you, Jane. And okay, Albon, thanks, Pascal. Excellent answers. Okay, but then we go here. Stephen Lee. Okay, great point on how Chinese managers are very focused on squeezing costs. That's how Foxconn came out on November 20 years ago to quickly surpass Solitron and Flextronics as the top contract manufacturer. Foxconn achieved that with lots of innovation in the manufacturing process, in organizing the factories, and etc. Yeah, don't forget that Foxconn is a Taiwanese company, so they brought in their best knowledge also from the West, and they make it happen in China with a very successful impact.
Yeah, but I mean, Stephen Lee has a point there. And actually, we used to be colleagues in Silicon Valley. I stayed 1.5 years in Silicon Valley. We worked at the same company, Wind River Systems. So he knows a thing or two about tech. And so it's true that that there's been a huge improvement in those 20 years. And so I'm not going to go into detail, or we're going to get technical on this one, but totally in agreement.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, so let's go to the next slides, which I prepare. Okay, where we talk about how China controls everything and how we think that we are more free, basically. So under the Western lenses, China is a controlled state without any freedom. And under the Chinese lenses, instead, the Chinese feel just as free as Westerners. What is freedom? That's the question. Okay, because if you ask me, I can tell you, I felt very much free to do my business, my life, and my entertainment in China without any problems. And I felt, most importantly, I felt secure. I was safe every time of the day, wherever I was. Okay, and the same things didn't happen in the West. So what's your experience, Pascal?
No, I mean, very often, I mean, the view on China when it comes to freedom is that people have no freedom or very little freedom. And I think that view is wrong. Having lived in China myself, of course, there are certain things. I mean, I don't need to explain about censorship and things that you just can't do that you could do in the West or in Europe or in America. But the vision that most Chinese feel that they are controlled is completely wrong. Which doesn't mean that there are some Chinese who feel controlled. I mean, that's if you have a lot of money, or if you are in an environment that is sensitive nationally for national security reasons. I mean, of course, you will be controlled, but you don't feel it. And I think the answer to me, and I wrote that in the book, it's in more extent later on in the book, it's really about the freedom that has been gained over the years by Chinese. And so political freedom, which we are usually referring to when it's about freedom, is not high on the agenda for many Chinese because there's many other freedoms that for them is more important to achieve than political freedom. And you could say that in a way, if the country is run in a way that you feel comfortable, I mean, why do you need, or do you actually need so much political freedom? And it's not just China. I mean, even countries like Portugal are less political engaged than other countries in Europe. So it really depends from country to country. And so I think, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
No. Well, talking about Portugal, I'd like to tell you that if it wasn't for China, Portugal would have definitely called for bankruptcy after the 2008 crisis. Okay,
yeah.
I mean, he had an agreement with the European Union for a way to return all of the money, the land, okay, but it was not going to be able to repay the loan from the EU unless China would have invested in the country and would have rebuilt the infrastructures and at an important thing. I mean, and one very important thing is that Portuguese people know it and they appreciate it. Okay, this is public information. Nobody knows it in Europe. Okay, nobody talks about it. Okay, but Portugal would not exist as a country in the European community if it was not for China supporting them with international trade and infrastructure. Just to close.
Yeah, well, it's just, but I mean, I've written a whole chapter, I mean, many paragraphs on freedom within my book. And so I think the concept of freedom, I unraveled that a little bit and talk about the gained freedom, and the reality of what freedom feels like, censorship and so on. And so it's just a different framework, but it's not because it's different that people feel controlled. And I think that's the story in very, very short, but I've written more about it in my book.
Yeah, I would like to read a message from Kevin Bourbon. It says, Tomiputra and other claimants like Malaysia, Philippines, and Brunei only laid claims to these overlapping features between the late 70s and 80s, a leftover from the French colonization of Vietnam. Okay, and it continues saying, Tomiputra, France used Vietnam to keep a check on China during the Qing dynasty. It's a lot of story behind it. It's true, okay.
Yeah, if you go, and this is what I said. If you go back in history, I mean, anybody can claim anything, depending on how far you go back. And I think that's the whole debate right now.
Absolutely, I am Italian, and as a descendant from the Romans, I should claim back Turkey and all the Mediterranean area, including Belgium and part of UK. Okay, how about that?
Yep.
I don't think it worked, but anyway, another comment we have from hold on a second, I think I missed it. Okay, another comment we have here is throughout history, China has always demonstrated to be trustful. The United States, the opposite. They cannot be trusted.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, what is trustworthy and what is not? I think that what is said in this story or in this sentence is that China has left other countries more alone. I mean, they didn't get involved as much in the local situation, besides economic in trade and economic benefits on both sides. But it's not, the US definitely has been very involved in many countries in the world and influenced. And so, yes, if that is the definition of being able to be trusted or not, that is definitely one way to look at it. The question is really, what is the outturn? I mean, has that involvement improved for the people? Has it improved for the countries? And in some cases it has. I mean, if we wouldn't have had the American involvement after the Second World War or during the Second World War, I think we wouldn't be giving this talk here today in the same language. Maybe we would do it in German. So, I mean, it has some benefits at some times. But on the other hand, I mean, there's many examples of the opposite. And for China, there's not many examples outside of its country where they have tried to control other countries through history.
Yeah, I do have a point, a very short one of this, and is that history, it is written by the winner. So only the one who wins the war will write history, and they will write their perspective of it. So we only know a side of a story. Okay, and it will be only historians that they go back in time, okay, and they will try to figure it out what it really was. And so things, change and get a different shape throughout the process. Okay, and okay, there is another message here from Albon. It says, Tomiputra, I think in one of his geopolitics discussion, these claims could have been negotiated less dramatically if US didn't insert itself to flame the fires. Oh, yes. Okay, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm less familiar with that specific topic.
Okay, and Tommy Putra says, thanks Kevin, I'm from Indonesia and it is usually making anti-China wave each time there are disputes in the South China Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we got some thank you from Fosco, and then we got other comments between peoples. Okay, let's go with the next slides. Okay, so we mentioned about the freedom and the concept of freedom. So, but what we really think sometimes is that Xi Jinping is a dictator. Okay, and people keep on telling me, that China is an authoritarian country where there is a dictator that tells people what to do. While
Mm-hmm.
on the other sides, okay, the Chinese thinks that they have a right leader for their own country, while in the West there are weak leaders. Okay, I often get stuck into these points. Usually when I do public speech, there are people goes like, yeah, but China is a dictatorship, and I go like, oh, here it comes. Okay, another one. I mean, we're talking about business, we're talking about other things, and then you come to me and tells me that China is a dictatorship. That irritates me many times. Okay, and I wonder, does it get on the nerves to you as well, or you have a way to come over these implications?
Yeah, no, I mean, I hear that. I mean, most of the times that people will say that China's a dictatorship. And so the problem with that is that we, in our history in the West, we don't trust dictators because there's very few dictators that we have as examples that have done good for their population and their country. But China has shown in many cases they have. And so we should look at China from a top-down regime more from its historical and societal and point of view. And this goes back 2,000, 3,000 years, 2,500 years of history, where a strong leader is often preferred to a weak leader, to put it in context with the West at this stage, where the leaders in Europe, in America, they talk a lot, but if you see how China realizes things, I'm always wondering if any country in Europe or in America would have 1.4 billion people like China, if they actually would survive in their leadership style. I'm not so sure. So I think that the problem is really that we in the West, we claim that China is a dictatorship, and by doing that, we're actually putting the blame on China as being bad, because most dictatorships in our world, in our history, are actually suppressing people and trying to control as much and not wanting to do good for the population. This is a lot about enriching a few at the top, and that rhetoric always comes back. And so in the West, it's not that the few are not protecting themselves, because the 1% rich are actually deciding a lot, definitely in politics. So we're doing the same thing. It's just that we claim it very differently by putting that label dictatorship on there. And so the democracy that we are, and if you've seen what happened at the G7, they every year they get together, but there's so much talk and very little action afterwards, because they have to go back to their countries and then convince the others to actually make that happen. And then what happens is that within the country they say, yeah, but we have no budgets for all these things, so everything just becomes blah blah, like many people say in the West. And so I think this is the issue. It's not because it's. And so my story here is that China has a strong leader. But also that China probably wants a strong leader and needs a strong leader. Is it the right leader? That's a different discussion. But they do need a strong leader. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is what comes up with the new slides we have. Okay, so China's ideology is not compatible with ours. Okay, and this is the Western lens. While from the Chinese lens, the West doesn't own a patent on democracy, because it's clear that democracy is not always getting the best results. Okay, would you like to tell a bit of what you wrote on the book in terms of a concept?
Yeah, the two sides. The patent on democracy, I made a video on YouTube about that as well, called Is China Democracy? Where it's really been explained in a way that, is it result-based or is it system-based? So our democracy in the West is much about the system and the ideology, while China, and with the Communist Party in charge, their ideology direction is much less prominent than actually making sure that the country progresses. And so we're putting a lot of emphasis on ideology, and we believe that this is the way that China actually wants to keep going. But the reality is that they're much more practical and pragmatic than that. And we keep on to that. But then even our democracy, we're trying to keep it together, because it's really in a crisis on itself, because it achieves much less. And so saying that our system is actually the right system, the Western democratic system, while we know it has a lot of cracks, while we know actually it doesn't always work as it should, and then saying China's system is not. I mean, it's a double standard for sure. That is clear. But that doesn't mean that China is a democracy in the way that we understand a democracy. But that also doesn't mean that China's system is not the right system for China.
Okay, maybe one day we will talk about the single party political systems that governs China and how it works. Okay, but it looks like there is a single party, so there is a single view. But I know for sure that before getting that view, there are a lot of fights, a lot of discussion, and a lot of alignments within the party members as well. Okay, so
once a Chinese friend told me, like, just to put another anecdote, is like, yeah, but America has two parties. That's just one more than China. And because they're so divided and the country might fall in two parts, maybe over time in the next 5 or 10 years, maybe there's going to be two countries with one party each. And so then we have the same system. It's just a joke.
Italy has 30 plus different parties, but they keep on fighting with each other and nobody get it right. So when it's time of election, we try to unite each other. They try to ally with each other, and so you never know who you vote to. Also, because Italy is a parliamentary republic, that means that we don't vote directly anybody, but we vote someone who represents someone else that represents someone else, and then the prime minister is decided by the one who has been voted by the voted one. So we have no direct control on anything. Okay, and there is an historical reason for this, but this is not what we're gonna talk about. Okay, so politician in the U.S. in the 80s left. Let's solve the problems on the environment, globalization, guns, immigration, labor, healthcare, taxes. Politician now. Let's talk about China. Should we trust her? Yeah. Thank you, Lee. I mean, it's a very nice example. Thank you.
Alberto, we're running over the hour, I think. So
we're running over the hours. Yeah, 1 hour and 2 minutes. What should we do? Should we do it next Wednesday, same time?
Yeah, it's just maybe we can save some of the questions and answer them next week.
Okay.
I mean, I'm fine, but I think some people will want to do other things, having scheduled this.
Okay, so this is another answer to Tommy Putra. The 9 dash lines is derived from 11 dash line published by ROC. The PRC just removed 2 dashes. Okay, and then we got do the two of you think that privacy in Europe seems to be getting into the way of progress? See the COVID apps here, especially German ones, and people seems to be trust private companies that nation.
Yeah, I think the comment I could give very shortly is that privacy has to do with trust. So somebody needs to trust the entity that makes sure that everything remains private. And the problem in Europe might be the lack of trust in the system to make sure that the privacy is respected. And because of that, because we've seen many situations from American companies like Google and Facebook that it's not being respected. And so there's a distrust into the system of keeping the privacy. And because of that, I think, yes, it's getting in the way of progress. But it's more a trust issue than a privacy issue, in my view.
Absolutely agree with you. Okay, another comment from Lee Nelson says, leave a spot to itself, let China be the spot, then we'll make America great and back again. Okay, yes, you're right. Thank you, Lee. Let's talk about China. Another comment is, unfortunately, that's how things will go for a while. The US want to hold on their top position in the world, taking orders, and China's progress is now the greatest threat to them. Yeah, absolutely. And they are right to be afraid, but they're wrong to be afraid for the reason they're afraid of. That's my position. Okay. Shenzhou says the Americans involved themselves in World War II because Pearl Harbor was bombed. So it's actually for their own stuff. Okay, and then we got Stephen tell us that Foxconn was founded in Taiwan, grew a big operation in China. I was in Taiwan when Foxconn was founded, and I had the pleasure to meet Terrigo over 30 years ago. Okay, that was, and he didn't speak.
No, he's answering to the things that we were talking about. I mean, it's true. It's been done in China by Chinese very often.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with Stephen. Thank you for the point. Agreed, Alberto. History is decided by the influentials. Thank you very much. And then we got another one. Will people eventually wake up to this glaring double standards that you brought up? Glaring.
I think yes. But I mean, so I don't think it's going to be a wake up, but I think more and more people are questioning it. The question is only, are the right people questioning it? But you do see more and more people in Europe, I don't know about the US, but in Europe, realizing that the story is more complex and there's more to it than what often they read in the media. That's my experience from talking to audiences. So there is an openness to understand and to sell, specifically in Europe. We know that we're not always doing the right things ourselves as well.
Absolutely. And this is a comment from Paul. He says, after 30 years of colonizing the world, it's about time for Europe and America to start earning on their respect, not the other way.
I think respect is an interesting word as well. So, because China puts a lot of weight on respect, and America has less of a challenge with that word. They put a lot of weight on other words like achievements and so on that are more important.
Yeah, and Paul Benny said that 300 years, not 30 years. Okay. And then we got another message from Jane. It's a good discussion about the so-called dictatorship, the leadership emerged from local context and the need. Claiming China as a dictatorship makes the job of Western journalists pretty easy. Absolutely agree with you, Jane.
It's about labeling.
Yeah. And then there is this message goes like, China's benefits from having a strong central government, as Chinese history has shown.
It's true, but it's a long story to go into that.
It is a long story.
But in every true tradition, definitely. If you look at the empires and the different dynasties, for sure, strong leaders have usually been holding the country together.
Yeah. Otro says the reason for not trusting the US, one is often unilaterally abandoning treaties, 2, not accepting ICC jurisdiction, 3, imposing neoliberalism and then U-turn, 4, only its own rules.
Yeah. The interesting question there is and it's something that's been wondering and bothering me for a long time, is we in Europe, we know many of these things, but most Europeans actually still trust America and the US quite a lot. And so it's an interesting debate that we should once have, is why that is, because we know the facts just like anybody in the world, but we still have a big trust in America, definitely much more than in China, where we have less influence, have had less influence in our own society than from the US. So it's quite an interesting topic as well. Nothing to do with China, but wanted to put it out there.
Nothing to do with China, but it has a lot to do probably with the mentality and the mindset. Mm-hmm. I believe that we Europeans are observing the agreements that we take one to the other, mm-hmm. sometimes even to the letters, okay? And we agreed to be following America's mm-hmm. and their policy for international politics back in the 50s after the Second World War, and we are still stick to those treaties, to those agreements. Yep.
But it's
Okay,
quite
so
interesting that when I mean, because if in Belgium or Italy or any country, I mean, we often see America do things that we don't really agree on, and we don't support. People go on the street to say no, this is not okay, but then they do it. But we never ever blame them after the fact, and that
yeah.
is something that is quite interesting as a perspective as well. Anyway, just a side discussion.
Okay, then Taiwan is not a country, says, look which country owns the most patents. It isn't poor India or poor USA. Or it continues, or isn't Germany nor Japan. Surprise, it's China.
That's a long debate on quality and quantity of patents. So I'm not going to go into detail there, but yes, if you look at the increase in patent applications, I mean, it's incredible. This is exponential, what has happened over the past decade in China. And so even the quality is improving as the quantity is happening.
Yeah. Then there is Shinzo again that says China runs a people's democratic dictatorship where policy has to bow down to the demands of the people. US run a dictatorship on the both, I don't know how to read
Bourgeoisie. Yeah, bourgeoisie. Yeah.
bourgeoisie. Is it a French word or what does it mean?
Yeah, it means the top level of society.
Okay.
The
Where
people
policy
who
goes down
are
to the
privileged.
demands of the elites. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So and it's interesting he uses people's democratic dictatorship because I've put that in my book as well. It's actually in the constitution of China. China is called the people's democratic dictatorship, which putting democratic and dictatorship next to each other for Westerners makes no sense whatsoever.
Like oxymoron, yes.
But that is a complete view that China can have because they have a less polarized view on these two words.
Yeah, okay. Then the question, is there any next leader candidate in China after Xi? Xi leadership is the best for China right now, but nothing lasts forever.
That's true.
There certainly is. It's just that we are not aware of it. It is not been announced, and it will be announced when the time for Xi is to come down. And for sure.
Right now, everybody expects Xi to have a third term, Xi Jinping, and it probably will. But I do believe that there's many capable leaders around him. I just think that most politicians at this stage or Communist Party members at the top level are quite confident that Xi will actually continue on the course which has put China on the map in many ways, and also secured the country also in many ways. So I think he won't need to last forever. There's many capable people that are around. The only question is it going to be the younger generation or the older generation? And if she stays another 5 years, it's probably going to be the younger generation. And that, in my view, is a good thing for China.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Some people like Wang Yi and others, and I mean, there's many people
that could be one of the next candidates.
They're getting old. They're getting old. So they're getting end of the 60s. Many of the top leaders in China. So I think another 5 years will give a new, rejuvenated politicians in China.
Yeah. I got another question here from Marco and says, how strong and autonomous are local government in China? My experience, well, if you need to get things done, then you really need to have a good local government connections, okay? And they can really help you to build up your plan.
I think the local governments are much stronger than we think. But when it's about federal national interests, then of course you need Beijing for certain support or approvals. I mean, much of their budget or even the loans that they can get is decided in Beijing. So governments are dependent on Beijing in one way, but they are making much more their own decisions on what to do than many people think. And that's why, and I think the interesting story about that, or looking at that, is that many of the local governments are actually competing with each other by focusing on different things and investing in certain things. And so that competition between governments just shows how strong and autonomous they are. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to compete. Then Beijing would say, you do this, you do that, and you do that. And that's not happening.
Yeah, I do have an interesting question, but we don't have the answer, and for sure not you as well. But under my point of view, it would be great if the next leader of China would be a female, would be a woman. Because Chinese women are so powerful and are so determined and are so capable of taking care of things, and they are so much more assertive by all means than men. That they don't need to use strength, violence, or any kind of things. They just get things done, And I believe that would be a great step to show also the world what it means to lead a country, because we will never know.
It's a long story, but
it is a long story.
But today in the National People Congress, there's already a lot of women, and Politburo there's only one. But that will change over time, I'm sure, because that will evolve, just like everything else in society is becoming more she-friendly. So in China, so I'm sure that will evolve too. Just needs some more time.
Absolutely. Let me go very fast to the comments, okay?
Sure.
So there is
one.
I think. Then there is this one. I say, thanks, Pascal. Looking forward to getting.
That's nice.
Great. And this is the purpose of our talk. I mean, we never talk about the book because we talk about what's inside the book. But really, the book, there is so much more. It's 321 pages. Full with small characters, the fonts are very small, full of information, of opinion, personal experience, and also exercise to understand and to give you a second opinion, a different perspective on what China is and why we could trust China. Because it's not a matter of can we should trust China, because without trusting China, there would be a much worse situation worldwide. And the book is an excellent tool to work toward these results. Okay, so
thanks for the promotion. I'm not going to do self promotion, but it's good to know. But I do believe that it's very.
This is my personal opinion. Yeah. We would. I mean. Don't worry. If I don't agree with you with anything, I will tell you.
I know you will tell me, but anyway, thanks.
Okay. So another watching Yin is a good choice. Okay, sure. Yeah, then we got great Alberto Pascal. Thank you very much, Lee. Okay, and then Why Yin is ATM not high official enough. Okay, and then we
at the moment
can be the next female. Ministers, okay.
I'm going to look into that because it's an interesting topic. Yeah,
it is. We will discuss about it soon. Yes, it is astonishing how much EU intrinsically trust the US, but not China. Well, it's not that I don't trust China. I think that there is a limitation on expressing their trust on China. I believe that, and I read the daily comments by European politicians that they say that China is an example that lead the way in many, many, many things, in particular about innovation. The thing is that we will need to balance, it's politics. You need to make everyone happy. Okay.
But I often have that people will use double standards against China, or meaning have an opinion about China and say something very direct and say like, China is a dictatorship, or China is cheating, or China is did, and they have very direct opinions in Europe. But then when I say, but why? This has nothing to do, just like you said with business, this has nothing to do with the discussion we were going on. So they're putting that label on there, but actually this wasn't this discussion what it was about. Well, they would never do that with the US. And that's an interesting situation where I've never had somebody in the audience of any speaker that talks about Silicon Valley that says, but how about Black Lives Matter in the US? I mean, if it's about technology or business, we don't talk about these things. But with China, as soon as you talk about anything, it's like, but how about the Uyghurs in Xinjiang or Hong Kong or whatever? So this is interesting to see, because that also shows the double standards. We have an opinion in Europe on the things that happen in China that are loaded, And we don't have that when it's about the US. Well, we have that same opinion on these political loaded questions. So interesting question. Sorry, it was a self-reflection I had.
Yeah. So Jane, instead, she's telling us, is it because European feels they still gain some benefit if the US dominates the global system, like the legacy of IMF, International Monetary, or the World Bank?
I think it's not just about benefit. I think it's about we feel aligned because it feels safe. It feels
like we said before.
It's comfortable. It's what we know.
Yeah, and this is an agreement we have. So we do not come less to certain agreements, and that's our position. Okay. Thank you, guys. I'm gonna leave now.
I think we should
may I suggest for the next topic,
wrapping up,
governance. Good governance for the next topic could definitely take into consideration.
Actually, this is something that I have put in my chapter 6. So we'll probably do that in a couple of weeks from now, because that is later in the book.
Perfect.
But I definitely will talk about that.
Okay, and then we got this one. This is Yves, and she says, considering the dissolve of double standards, I guess people, ideas, and outlook need an impact. It's not like that rising story of Genshin impacted, but the true progress that lead the world to go ahead.
Yeah, I think, Alberto, I think we should wrap up here and take these questions maybe next time to start with. Those that are remaining. Is that okay with you?
It's very much okay with me.
Yeah, just because
it's 1 hour and 21 minutes.
Yeah, I think otherwise it becomes too long for everyone.
Next time we should invite everybody for dinner so that we can go on.
A virtual dinner. Okay. No, I think this is fantastic. I really like doing this. I think if there's any, next time we can talk about another topic. I would like to address a topic related to the individual. Maybe next time. So the
smaller circle of trust, like you call it.
The smallest circle of trust. But we can still answer a few of these double standard questions, and throughout the other live streams we can keep going at that because it's one of the most loaded parts of the discussion about China, and I think we will encounter it many times throughout the live streams. But thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Talk to you next Wednesday, 4 p.m.
Next Wednesday, we'll do the same time. I hope the time works out, but I'll see. If not, send us a comment on YouTube or any other channel. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.